As many of you know, I grew up in New York City, which means that my experiences and formative encounters with sheep are pretty minimal. Almost non-existent. Actually, there's one and only one, and it came when I was a novice at the Colorado Springs Rodeo, in an event known as mutton bustin'. For the unaware, mutton bustin' is the blatant attempt to convince the youth of America that bull riding is a good idea. It's one of those events in between the main sections of the rodeo that are meant to keep the crowd's attention as they transition from the hog tying to the actual bull riding. And the basic premise is this: you stick a 5-year-old on the sheep and see how things go. The sheep is quite agitated and runs around in circles, and basically it's just going to keep running in circles until it's exhausted and falls right over. And hopefully the 5-year-old survives this encounter. On this Good Shepherd Sunday, it's easy for us to image in our mind the icon of the Good Shepherd, of Christ with the sheep on his shoulders, and it's loving and it's caring and it's beautiful. But if you think about it, if Christ is the Good Shepherd, it's slightly convicting of us as sheep. They're just not the most intelligent people in the world. But friends, if we're honest with ourselves, the comparison may not be all that far off. We know ourselves, we know our faults, we know our failings. We know what the Lord calls us to and what the Lord gives to us and invites us to, yet time and time again, we manage to ignore that call or forget that call. We know the Lord's love, we know his goodness, we know his promise, and yet each day we as human beings struggle to live the people that he has created us to be. We struggle to be kind, to be charitable, to be loving, to be generous, to be chaste. Even though we know what we ought to do, even though we know what our God calls us to do, even though we know our God invites us into his heavenly glory as a result of those things, it's far from easy. And we find it within ourselves each day to be forgetful of or ignore the people that our God has created us to be. We know our sin. We know those moments of temptation. We don't need to look very hard to see the brokenness in the world around us, in ourselves, in our society, even at times in our church. We don't have to look hard to see the ways that we fall short of God's call and invitations time and time again. But friends, on this Good Shepherd Sunday, those moments remind us that our Lord, our God, is one of infinite patience. And though we might frustrate him or fall short over and over and over again, he will never tire. He will never tire in his patience, in his compassion, in his generosity, or in his love. Time and time again, we might fall, and time again, the Lord reaches out to us and invites us back up on our feet to follow him ever more closely, ever more deeply. The Lord will always be there for us. And like the true Good Shepherd he is, will always seek to guide us home. And so, friends, with that good news, the Lord in today's gospel gives us two important reminders that sustain us in our journey with the Good Shepherd. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. My sheep hear my voice. Friends, the Lord reminds us that the question isn't whether or not God speaks. The question is whether or not we're willing to listen. The question he calls us to ask is if we're giving God the space to speak to us in our life. Are we giving him the silence? Are we giving him the time? Are we giving him the attention to communicate his love, his grace, his compassion to us in the scriptures, in the sacraments, in those moments of prayer and beauty that punctuate our day over and over again? Are we so caught up in our day-to-day tasks and concerns and worries that we simply rush past those multitude ways God seeks to speak to us each day? And if that might be the case, perhaps God invites us this morning to take a deep breath, to stop for just a moment, and to acknowledge his presence among us, here at Mass, at home with your families, in the glory of this lovely South Bend spring day. Our Lord speaks, friends, and he speaks always. It's up to us to have the courage and the will to listen. And we listen because our Lord speaks not as one who's distant and far from us, who simply seeks to control us from on high, but our Lord speaks as one who knows us, who in fact knows us better than ourselves. I know them, and they follow me. Friends, we're willing to follow where the Lord leads us precisely because he's not the sort of God who's distant and far, whose will knows nothing of our plight, but precisely because he's a God who loves us so much that he sought to take on our condition, to live among us, to know us, and to lead us to heaven by his willingness to sacrifice his own life for us, by his death and resurrection on the cross. Our Lord is one who knows us and knows us intimately well, who knows every hair on our head, every fiber of our being, knows every one of our thoughts, desires, passions. And out of that knowledge seeks to shape us and form us and guide us into the very best version of ourselves, into the people that he has created us to be, so that our lives might glorify him in all things. Those moments are difficult, and sometimes what he calls us to is hard. But if we trust in how much he knows us, how well he knows us, we will find the grace and the courage to follow the path of the Good Shepherd, because he will always lead us home to himself.